Hello, welcome to the first ever episode of the Cinema MD podcast. My name is Matt.
And I'm Dana.
And just to give you a brief rundown of what this podcast is all about, we are just talking everything movies. We're going to review some new releases, some old movies, maybe some Blu-ray releases, some forgotten gems, maybe have some, top 5, top 10 lists here and there. Hopefully, eventually, we'll be able to take some listener requests on maybe some movies they want to hear us talk about. That'd be great. I'm also going to give you a little info about me. I, don't have a degree in film or anything like that, but I'm a huge fan of movies, and I have been for a very long time. Grew up just outside Detroit, and I'm an only child, so I guess movies and TV were both kind of like my go-to hobby of choice, along with video games when I was a kid. And I think as time's gone on, the primary focus of my hobbies has definitely shifted towards film more than anything else. As opposed to a kid who had brothers and sisters keeping him busy all day, I would, sit my ass on the couch and, watch Willow on TNT or something. So that was kind of how I got going. I was never really sheltered from any sort of movies. I was always able to watch, I was able to watch Nightmare on Elm Street when I was a little kid. My mom introduced me to The Exorcist and The Shining because she thought those were really good horror movies. And I remember she had me watch Halloween when I must have been 8 or 9 years old. And it wasn't, I guess I'm one of those people where I could always differentiate what was real and what was a movie because they never really gave me, nightmares or gave me any sort of like weird issues. I always was able to just see a movie for what it was and enjoy it for what it was.
And on to a little bit about myself. Like I said, I'm Dana. Matt is my husband.
Did I not mention that?
No, that's okay though. Doesn't have much to do with context of movies, so that's fine. We grew up in the same area. I did have siblings growing up, but pretty big age gaps between all of us, so wasn't necessarily spending my days with them. My love for movies came more from kind of a bonding hobby with my dad. He wasn't really a sports guy, so movies was definitely where it was at for the two of us. I was sheltered from certain movies growing up, which will bring us eventually to probably a standard recurring theme on this show is that I missed out on a lot of iconic cultural norms that most people have seen, so we'll be revisiting some of those. But yeah, always loved movies. It was definitely a go-to hobby for me. It's been more as an adult in more recent years that I have become more critical of films and gotten more into the behind-the-scenes aspects and as far as directors and scores and things like that. So I'm excited.
I make her watch the commentaries sometimes.
Hey, that's all right sometimes. But yeah, excited to kind of get into it and learn more.
So, as Dana was saying, she was sheltered from certain films, and that does bring us to the first film that I would like to review here on the Cinema MD podcast. And it's not a new movie. This is what I would consider a classic 80s film. This is something that I feel like everybody who grew up in the 80s and probably 90s has seen. It's an iconic movie. It's sort of a kids movie, sort of a Christmas movie, sort of a monster movie. You probably already know what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about Gremlins. Directed by Joe Dante in 1984, produced by Steven Spielberg. It was made under the Amblin Entertainment banner, which also, made films like Goonies. And, I think Gremlins and Goonies both, kind of responsible for the kind of resurgence in 80s culture that we have with things like shows like Stranger Things. So I get that you were kind of sheltered from certain movies, but why Gremlins?
Honestly, after seeing this movie, I had to call my mom and ask why exactly I was not allowed to see Gremlins because it was really kind of beyond me. I would say as a kid, I was definitely more of a kid who could be prone to being scared over a movie or having nightmares, but Gremlins, I'm really not seeing it. So she didn't have a good answer for me.
Well, just to give a little history lesson, some interesting things to note about the movie Gremlins, which maybe this helps explain things a little bit. While Gremlins wasn't the first PG-13 movie, that goes to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Gremlins was kind of noted as the movie that forced the Motion Picture Association of America to come up with the PG-13 rating. Apparently there was a bit of an outrage that this movie was too violent or too frightening for kids under the age of 13 to see. And I guess I really don't get that, per se. I get that there's some strange tone shifts in the movie. You know, it goes from cute and cuddly, weird little creatures to, you know, violent, sociopathic gremlins, as it were. And there's definitely some violence, but I feel like it's very, very kind of cartoony and over the top, so I don't really get the need, at least the need for them to create an entirely new rating based off of the violence in this film.
What's funny about the first PG-13 rated movie was I was totally allowed to see Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which was a childhood favorite for sure. Had no problems with the, heart being ripped out of the chest, none of that. And, my parents thought that was totally fine for me to see. So I think one of the other reasons I might have missed out on Gremlins, it came out the year I was born. Spoiler on my age there. And I think by the time I was old enough to see it and enjoy it, none of my siblings were really that interested in it anymore. And I think a lot of movie choices did go to my dad, so maybe if he wasn't interested in it or it wasn't a personal favorite of his, it just wasn't, something that we really sought out to watch.
And I'll be honest, I don't really know how I came across the movie Gremlins when I was a kid. I assume it was on TV, probably played on cable at some point over and over again. Just one of those movies that I happened to see a lot. So I guess I don't know why this has, it's become a classic. Obviously, everybody kind of knows about Gremlins. I think the Gizmo character is kind of the reason for that. It's a very iconic little character. I mean, it inspired, a sequel, first of all, but then it also inspired, things down the road as far as like Furbies in the late 90s. So it's definitely an important movie. I think you've got, great effects. You've got these gremlin creatures, which are just awesome looking. Honestly, the Gizmo himself, to me, is kind of the least interesting of all of the creatures in the movie. I mean, he's kind of funny. I mean, when he's like sitting there and they do close-ups on him, his little eyeballs are swirling around, and he kind of looks like he's half in the bag the whole time. Honestly, he looks fucked up. But really, I thought the movie got way more interesting once all of a sudden there were, some, xenomorph eggs hanging out everywhere and no one knows what the hell's going on. And then all of a sudden out pops some slimy, scaly monsters. And then I think that leads to, in my opinion, the scene that caused this to basically be considered too violent of a movie for the PG rating. And I think it's the scene where Do You Hear What I Hear is playing, and the main character's mother is in the house alone with all of the newly spawned gremlin creatures, and she essentially goes on a killing spree, massacring these creatures in every conceivable way possible. You've got a blender used, a butcher knife, a microwave, one of them's, I think, thrown in a fireplace. So you've got some really kind of violent, crazy shit going on. You've also got the token black character in the movie who, at the very least, is an educated science teacher, although he doesn't really make educated decisions in this film. You've got him dying to a gremlin trying to feed it a candy bar while he gets, stabbed to death by a syringe or some such nonsense. So yeah, you've definitely got some violence, and that's kind of the tone shift of the movie. And from there, it kind of, instead of becoming what you think might be more of a horror film, it just gets really, really weird and goofy.
Honestly, I found the most disturbing part of the movie to be the crazy neighbor who wanted to kill the dog. Like, what's wrong with the dog? I never really understood her motive for, all out animal killing. But, so I thought that was the weirdest portion of it. But otherwise, I totally loved it. It definitely held up. It was still entertaining to watch. Sometimes when you revisit movies, or obviously in my case for the first time, movies from when you were a kid or from the 80s, what have you, it's a little cringy, a little hard to get through, but this was definitely still a fun watch.
Yeah, I agree. Gremlins is always a great movie to watch. I don't know about its merits as a Christmas movie, considering that one of the most Christmassy parts of the movie happens to be Phoebe Cates talking about the time that her dad, dressed up as Santa Claus, jumped down the chimney to give them presents, snapped his neck, and died, and they didn't find out until they smelled him.
Yeah, that was real uplifting, too.
Yeah, so some real cool shit going on in that movie. Really gets you in the holiday spirit. But yes, overall, I got Dana to watch Gremlins. She hadn't seen it before. Somehow, over 30 years, had never watched that movie. So I feel like I have accomplished something, and I feel good about myself. I feel like I've done a public service here.
Glad I could help.
All right, so that's Gremlins for you. We both loved it. Everyone loves it. I don't think too much more needs to be said about Gremlins. So we're going to go on to our first new review, and we're going to be talking about the movie Dunkirk. And I know Dunkirk, a lot of people have probably seen this movie. Made a ton of money in its opening weekend. It's a Christopher Nolan movie, so this guy doesn't really make bad movies. The worst thing he's directed has probably been Dark Knight Rises, which might be the worst of his 3 Batman movies, but it's still better than, anything that DC's come out with the exception of maybe Wonder Woman in the past 20 years. So the guy makes great movies. That's all there is to it. So I don't know. What were your impressions of Dunkirk? We saw this at 9 a.m. just to give you guys some context. So this was like a 9 a.m. screening, front row, drinking my coffee while I'm, seeing British soldiers being shot at. So I woke up real fucking fast.
Yeah, we're definitely officially old people now because we like to go see the early screenings during the week. But the movie was excellent. From minute one, you just were in it. I didn't really know a lot of the history behind it, so it was, sort of a new information, fresh perspective. So I thought that was really cool. Myself being more of a person who can be affected by scenes in movies, it was definitely a quote-unquote easier war film to watch. There wasn't a lot of, blood and gore and hand-to-hand combat. It just was super tense right off the bat, and, the tension just mounting and building as they're surrounded and, trying to figure out how to evacuate, where to go from there.
Yeah, I think you make a real interesting point. This is a lot different kind of war movie than I'm used to, and that I think a lot of people, at least in America, might be used to. We're kind of, we grew up with things like Saving Private Ryan and Platoon, Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket. These are very visceral, violent, gory movies in a lot of ways, and they get pretty dark. That being said, Dunkirk maintains a very high level of stress throughout without having really any gore whatsoever. There's definitely violence, but it's done subtly compared to a lot of other war films. It doesn't throw it in your face. That it's a dangerous situation. You know that these people, many of them are going to die, but they don't go into the violent, gory, bloody details of those deaths. The other thing that was very interesting is that despite the fact that there are literally German soldiers surrounding them in every direction, not once in the movie do you lay eyes on a German soldier.
Yeah, I definitely took note of that too. That was going to be my next point as well. So it really created this sense of even worse or even bigger foreboding because it was almost this unseen enemy or a larger than life enemy that there was no escape from. You were surrounded on all sides, but the threat wasn't always obvious. It sometimes came out of nowhere. So I thought that really didn't put any sort of human face on the enemy. It just made it more, foreboding and.
It's kind of a fear of the unknown. I mean, this is a tactic that's been used by filmmakers, for a long time, and I think, famously used in Jaws by Steven Spielberg. I mean, you know there's a shark. Everyone knows there's a shark, but you don't see the shark until damn near the very end of the movie. You might see a fin here and there, but that's it. And this is the same thing with Dunkirk. In the beginning of the movie, one of the characters finds a pamphlet, basically like a propaganda pamphlet. And it just has like a giant X in the middle of the map, and it says, "You are here." And then it just shows arrows pointing in on them, saying that they are surrounded. And I guess the point being these were basically dropped by the Germans to basically instill fear in the British soldiers at that point, because they were literally surrounded. So there's tremendous fear of an unknown assailant that you never see. The difference being, we all know what the Nazis look like. We've seen them portrayed in any number of movies. So I don't think that it takes away from the movie at all. I think it adds to it. I think it makes it unique, and it makes it more of a individual movie that I'll remember because of that. I don't think it to me it doesn't scream like I'm a Christopher Nolan movie either, though. It's a good war movie, but it's definitely not my favorite Christopher Nolan movie by any stretch of the imagination. It's not my favorite war movie by any stretch of the imagination. I think it's a really, really good movie. I don't want to knock it too hard here, but, for what it's worth, it's like a 7 out of 10 for me. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It's always hard for me to pick favorites of things in terms of categories as far as war movies, things like that. I usually try to take things on their own merit and sometimes compare here and there, but I don't know, for me, preferring less of the horrifying gore and things like that, I would say as far as war movies go, I would rate this one a little bit higher than that. As far as Christopher Nolan films, I'm a little more on the fence about some of the Batman films, things like that. I guess I'm more of a purist in terms of some of the original ones. But yeah, I thought this was a great movie. Really couldn't find too much faults with it. It had 3 storylines going on at the same time, and it was pretty easy to follow because they were in very different locations. The only very slight criticism I had was just kind of stylistically, they labeled each location briefly in terms of where they were, and they were all sort of going on at the same time and overlapping a little bit. I actually found the labeling of it to be a little more confusing. Maybe would have misled people a little bit. 'Cause I think I would have been able to figure it out on my own without that. But that was, like I say, a very minor criticism.
Well, speaking of style, I don't know if you noticed one of the actors in the movie, Harry Styles from the band One Direction, well, formerly of the band One Direction, basically his first major acting role. And since I don't think you knew that he was really in the movie, which I think goes to show that he did a pretty damn good job because he wasn't distracting in any way. I don't think any of the actors were distracting. I think they all did an excellent job in this movie.
Yeah, I had no clue that that's who that was.
He wasn't the main character. He was, so the first character that we see, who, I'm going to be honest, I don't think they really gave any of the characters' names for the most part. Or if they did, it was fleeting. So it didn't really matter. You identified with them because you were basically following them through this hellish experience. You didn't need to know who they were. It wasn't, this wasn't Tom Hanks in Saving Private Ryan, where we were given the everyman hero to kind of identify with and follow. We were just given, a handful of characters that were put into a shitty situation and had to make the best of it and we followed them through that experience. Tom Hardy's the biggest name in the movie, and his performance is fine, but it's very along the lines of something like Mad Max Fury Road, where it's a minimalist performance. I mean, he's got a few lines of dialogue, significantly less grunting than Mad Max, or if you watch the show Taboo, he's very grunty on that show. But really, I mean, the only actor that's given a significant amount of lines is Mark Rylance, who won Best Supporting Actor for his work in Bridge of Spies. And he's spectacular in the movie, but again, he's pretty much the only character given a lot of work to do as far as line memorization. It's a physical movie. I mean, you've got characters jumping and swimming and climbing and, being shot at. So I think more than anything, it's an action movie, but it doesn't really feel like an action movie too much.
Yeah, it definitely had more of the realism than can sometimes be attributed to an action movie, I would say. Still lots of explosions, but not gratuitous explosions or anything in excess. It still seemed very realistic, and obviously they're portraying a historical event, so good to keep it on the side of real there. But I like I said, I thought it was an incredible film. And I would say it's rewatchable, whereas sometimes for me, like I say, some of the other war films, I'm glad that I saw it. It was a piece of art. I'm happy to experience it, but I don't necessarily want to revisit it, where I could see myself watching this one again.
I think the runtime has a lot to do with it. This was a pretty brisk, hour and 40-minute movie. I feel like the vast majority of war movies coming out, I mean, even, total shit like Pearl Harbor ended up being 3 hours long. I mean, let's be honest, nobody really needs to sit through 3 hours of body parts being blown up on Normandy or on Pearl Harbor. I mean, it's kind of a slog to watch Saving Private Ryan, and when you're done with it, you appreciate what you've just watched, and you know that you watched something special, but it's definitely not a movie you're going to be popping in every weekend. This is something that you can put on and kind of breeze through it. I mean, it's an hour and 40 minutes. You're not really committing your entire afternoon to it, so I think that's good. All right, score. I gave it a 7 out of 10. What are you thinking?
I thought the score was great too. Obviously, because it's not a dialogue-heavy film, the score is really guiding you through it, which it should be for any great film. But yeah, I thought it was really great. Picked up when it needed to, cued you into some tense moments, even though, like I say, the whole film was pretty tense. But definitely acted as, basically score as narrator kind of thing. So I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I'd go with 7.5.
I agree. I don't think it was memorable in that I'm going to, be playing it in my head, during a Dungeons and Dragons session or something, for example. It's not going to be the background music of my life. I'm not going to remember it like I remember, something iconic like, say, Pirates of the Caribbean theme or the Star Wars theme, anything like that. But I think it did what it was supposed to do. It served its purpose well, and it was a good, effective score that didn't detract from the movie. And it's always shitty when a score takes away from a film, just when it just feels out of place. All right, so overall score for the movie. What did you? It seems like you liked it a little bit more than me. I thought it was good, not great. You seem to think it was a pretty damn good movie. How are you scoring this one out of 10?
By the way, I don't know that we're making the scoring out of 10 a regular device here, but I'm okay to start off that way. I don't know.
How many? Okay, I give it 7 pickle ricks out of 10.
All right. Well, I guess I'd go with 8. I'd give it a little higher. I'm fine to do a rating system, but we can switch it up. Maybe next time it'll be Pugs, because Pugs are the ultimate rating system.
Fair enough. Pugs and pickle ricks. 7 out of 10 for Dunkirk. Okay, we got one more new movie to review for the week, and this is a movie that is quite divisive.
It's not that divisive. It was pretty bad.
Okay, this is a bad movie. I think I liked it maybe more than Dana did. She has more personal stake in this film, I believe. The movie we're talking about is The Dark Tower. the adaptation of Stephen King's series of novels. And I'm gonna
say the word adaptation is a pretty far stretch.
Would you prefer reimagining?
I guess.
All right. So The Dark Tower. Now, I thought the casting in this movie was excellent. Let's start out with something positive about the movie, because I don't think there's going to be a lot of positive about the movie. So let's start with that.
Okay, I can get on board there. This movie and other possible shows, other movies, things like that, has been in the works for quite some time. I know that obviously being a fan of the book series, so I've kind of kept up a little bit on the Hollywood chatter on it. There was a lot of dissent when Idris Elba was named as the main character, mostly obviously because he's black, and the main character in the books is modeled after a Clint Eastwood type. So a lot of people felt that he couldn't accurately portray that. I did not feel that way. I think he's a great actor, and I had no problem with that change. I thought it would be something that was interesting. However, there is a relationship within the book series that hinges upon racial tension, so I was interested to see how they would handle that. Well, they handled that by just not having that character in the movie at all. So, you can see where this is going. So, we'll see what else Matt has to say.
All right. Well, I'm gonna stick with Idris Elba here, because I do feel like, and I'm sure there's other actors that would fall into this category as well, but I feel like Idris Elba might be the most poorly used actor in Hollywood right now. I feel like every movie that he is in, he is grossly underutilized or like used poorly. I don't know. You've got him playing like a bit part in the Thor movies, which, I don't know, it kind of seems like in the upcoming Thor Ragnarok, he's going to have more to do, and I really hope that's the case, because, you know, he plays Heimdall in those movies, and that's a really cool character, and Idris Elba is just a super talented actor. I think the guy should be one of the, like, big stars in Hollywood right now. You know, he's kind of got that, he's like a British Denzel Washington in his prime kind of thing going on, and I think he's a great Roland in The Dark Tower. I get what you're saying about the relationship with another black character who they opted to cut out of this movie entirely. That being said, they opted to cut a lot out of this movie entirely, and they basically just copy and pasted sections from all 7 books here and there where it was convenient for them. They almost used like all 7 books to rewrite their own version of the first book.
It just didn't make sense. It just was so sad. This is one of my all-time personal favorite book series. I have reread it twice. I'm in the middle of rereading it for a third time because after seeing this movie, I was very sad, and I needed to comfort myself by returning to this, to Roland's world, if you will. But yes, as far as Idris Elba being underutilized, I would say that's also true of this movie, even though he's the lead, because they didn't really focus on his character that much.
I was going to say, I'd argue that he's not really the lead. He might have been marketed that way, but Tom Taylor is the lead in this movie. You know, and I will say he does an admirable job as a sort of adolescent actor. I feel like they normally, you know, more often than not, an adolescent actor or a young child actor they're going to really take away from a movie, a la, you know, maybe not as bad as something like Phantom Menace, but you get where I'm going with this. I thought he was excellent. He played Jake, who is another central character in the Dark Tower series, and I thought he did a really, really good job of playing the character.
Yeah, I had no problem with the acting, and I basically was clear that obviously the actors have to work with what they're given, which just really wasn't a lot. I mean, Matthew McConaughey is a great actor also, and was a great fit for that character of Walter, the kind of the bad guy. They just really kind of jumbled it up. I knew going into the movie that it was not going to be based on the books, that it was sort of a reimagining. I just couldn't separate what I already know about the book series from the movie. I tried to look at it through an independent lens of, okay, just as its own story, how does this hold up? It just didn't really feel that strong of a film on its own. I mean, this whole series would have been better as a Game of Thrones style show. There's just so much going into it. I think they could have done a film series. Stephen King has a huge fan base, so really the people who knew this backstory going into it were already going to be disappointed because they screwed it up.
Yeah, and you're talking about how it could have been a film series or a television series, and I think either of those would have been a good way to go. I think TV series on, AMC or HBO probably would have been the best possible outcome for everybody. I think a film series and planning for like anywhere from 3 to 7 films, I guess, depending on how faithful they wanted to do it, that's a tall order. I mean, the only film series that pulled that off was Harry Potter, at least in recent memory.
For sure. I don't think that you would have had to do it in 7 movies. I have kind of tried to piece it together in my own head of how, if it were up to me, how would I have done it? Because I don't think that the first book really stands alone as a full movie. And then some of the later books are longer and have a lot more going on, so those would maybe need to be split up. I would have been totally fine with cutting some major plot points, sort of reimagining certain things and moving things around. I totally get that you can't translate 100% from the page to the screen. But they did. They just picked and chose what they felt were exciting parts of the book. And it just didn't really give you much. You weren't sucked into this universe, which I feel like you get through the books.
No, it felt generic. And I think that's one of the worst crimes that a fantasy or science fiction film can commit. If you don't feel like you're seeing something unique, then and this doesn't just go for movies, honestly. This goes for any intellectual property where you're using, a fantasy or science fiction setting. I mean, if it doesn't feel unique, if it feels like it could be generically replaced with anything else, then you're not succeeding. It's not going to be memorable, and it's not going to be successful. It's a big problem because, it's like, is your fantasy setting unique, or is it just making you think of Lord of the Rings? In this case, it just felt like generic pseudo sci-fi with some fantasy thrown in. It kind of felt like it was jumbled together. And I do want to touch on Matthew McConaughey too, because I don't think he was, this was not one of his better roles. They didn't really give him much of anything to work with. The script was pretty shoddy. There were some fun, little one-liners and things in there, especially for Roland. But I don't think that Matthew McConaughey as the Man in Black was given much to work with. He did his best to kind of chew up the scenery when he was there and, play the villain. But, he was just so much better as kind of like the ambiguously villainous character in something like True Detective, where you kind of don't know where his motivations lie. And not that he was villainous in that show, but he definitely was morally ambiguous at the very least. And I thought that they didn't give him any of that. He was just like a stone-faced, bad guy, cookie-cutter, generic villain. I don't know.
Yeah, that's definitely the word that came to mind, was cookie cutter. They just tried to make it really fit the Hollywood mold, I guess, of, this is what we can do to make money. And really, I think studios should be finding now that there are other ways to make money without staying within that mold. And I think sometimes you end up being more successful, either staying true to a story or basically not insulting fans' intelligence, kind of. It's like, we can handle a little more than this very neatly tied package, which, the conflict was resolved, and then at the end they sort of left it open for more movies if they want, which are not going to happen. But really, the epic of the Dark Tower is not something that could have been solved in one movie, and the sort of feeble attempt at the end of, well, you can come with me on more adventures. What other adventures could they possibly go on, because it looks like everything's tied up?
I couldn't agree more. It's a generic science fiction movie. It's a bad generic science fiction movie. The acting can't redeem the bad script. It's just a shit adaptation or reimagining of a really good book series. And that's sad. I think that this happens, relatively often, especially with Stephen King books. It's funny enough, he pretty much put his praise behind this movie. But, for example, he hated Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. So one thing to keep in mind, I wouldn't put any stock into Stephen King's opinion on his own book adaptations.
Yeah, I always find that a little weird because I like a lot of Stephen King works. Not every single one, but I've read quite a few, and I like his style. Some people find him to be overly descriptive. I find it more immersive. But yeah, I don't really trust his opinion on his own adaptations or the adaptations of his work in film.
All right, so what would you rate The Dark Tower?
As a book fan, I can't really give it much of a rating. I mean, I guess if we're going out of 10...
How many pugs out of 10?
How many pugs? I'll give it 2, seriously. Just because I can't knock the actors' performances, but there really wasn't anything else to go off of. I know some people found there were a lot of nods to the book, like kind of little hidden Easter eggs in the scenery, but I honestly just found it more insulting. You should have just done it right the first time.
All right. Well, I'm not going to be quite as harsh. I'm not going to give it a 2. That being said, I think a 4 is as high as I'm going to go. If 5 is an average, unremarkable movie, then I think this is just a pretty much below average, unremarkable movie. And I'm going to give it a solid 4. I think if you're not a fan of the books, if you're going in blind, I think this is probably one of those movies that's worth maybe like a Netflix watch, on a boring Sunday when it comes out. I don't think it's worth much more than that. That being said, if they somehow manage to get the financing to make more movies, I think they have a chance to potentially redeem themselves, because this movie, while bad, is not completely without merit. So I think they could redeem themselves if they somehow make more. I don't think that's going to happen. I think this is the death knell for The Dark Tower for at least the near future.
I totally see that, and I would follow that up. Obviously my rating was as a fan of the books. I would agree that trying to look at it from an outside view of just, hey, I don't really know anything about this movie, just going to see a movie, I would give it a little bit of a higher rating. I think 4 is fair, maybe 3.5 or so. I would, that's fine. What I'm hoping for, and again, I know it will not happen, but the ideal situation would be if they just ignored this movie, and if someone else took over The Dark Tower and wanted to...
You want them to Spider-Man it?
Yes, that is what I would like. Just completely ignore this version, just either do a movie. I think it really would work better as a show, just since there's so much content. And I think you could get a better fan base and get more people interested. So that'll be my secret dream that I know will never come to fruition.
All right, so Dark Tower sucked. Let's scrap it. Let's get Damon Lindelof when he's done with Game of Thrones, and let's hook up with HBO and get a new show going. That's pretty much where we're at with The Dark Tower. Okay, so moving on to the last segment of our first episode. Sticking with The Dark Tower, we're going to talk about book-to-movie adaptations, and there's been basically an uncountable number of book-to-movie adaptations, because everyone knows it's a whole lot easier to adapt something than to come up with a completely original idea from scratch. I'm not knocking these, because honestly, a lot of really, really good movies are book-to-movie adaptations. So Dana and I each have our own list of these, and we're going to go through these kind of... we have a top 5 apiece here, so we're going to go 5 to 1 and just briefly discuss each of these movies and, what they do that The Dark Tower completely fucked up. So I'm going to start it out here with my number 5 book-to-movie adaptation, John Carpenter's The Thing. If you didn't realize this was a book-to-movie adaptation, it is technically based on the book Who Goes There by John W. Campbell, which was written in the 1930s. It was then made into a film in the 50s by Howard Hawks, and then again by John Carpenter. And I'm specifically referring to the 80s version, the John Carpenter version, which, for my money, is one of the best horror films of all time. This book basically has nothing to do with the John Carpenter movie, other than the fact that it's kind of set in a, Antarctic base. The thing in the book is based on plant life, so it's kind of more a la like M. Night Shyamalan's stupid fucking movie where the plants came to life.
Yeah, I was gonna say that should never make a top 5 list. But
you know what I'm talking about? The one where where the plants made people commit suicide.
Happening?
The Happening. Oh, that movie sucked. That
go.
was such a bad movie. Oh my god. Props to M. Night Shyamalan for ending his streak of suck. Anyways, yeah, The Thing comes in at number 5 for me because yes, it is based on a book and it's an awesome movie.
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like you just kind of wanted to work The Thing in there somewhere because you love that movie and you were like, oh, it's based on a book. I can use it.
That is exactly what I fucking did.
So, okay, I'll forgive it this time. My number 5 was Fight Club. I am not really a fan of Chuck Palahniuk or however the hell you want to say that. When I was in high school, everyone was super up that guy's ass. Like, just everyone loved his books, thought they were so edgy and so cool. I believe I saw Fight Club first. I thought it was a really unique movie. When I first saw it, didn't realize it was a book. Read the book later, also liked the book. For the most part, though, not really a fan of his writing style. I think it's just kind of overrated and pretentious. But, yeah, I thought that was a great adaptation. Obviously changed a few things as needed, but I thought that it worked really well and obviously a super kind of iconic movie, I would say, at this point.
Yeah, and you managed to pick something that is a polar opposite from my number 5 choice in that it is a pretty direct, faithful adaptation of the book that it's based on. And I think Fight Club is a great choice. That being said, I also have to tell you that when I was in 10th grade, my English... Was it 10th grade? You know what? Maybe it was 11th or 12th grade. I don't really remember. But my English teacher was lending their copy of Choke to people in the class that wanted to read it, which I find... highly inappropriate after both reading that book and seeing the movie. Holy shit. What high school teacher is giving out copies of Choke to minors?
They thought they were being cool. They were being the cool teacher.
They must have fucking had tenure. That's all I can say. All right, I'm going to jump down to number 4. And this is one that's probably on just about everybody's list. The Lord of the Rings trilogy. This is pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, Peter Jackson took a bunch of liberties with the books because actually going point for point and making these into 3 films is damn near impossible. So he cut some things here and there, changed some things a little bit, but really these are pretty faithful adaptations, and they're a ridiculous achievement. Obviously, he won Best Picture for Return of the King. He probably should have won Best Picture for Two Towers, in my opinion, over Return of the King, but they kind of gave him like the series achievement award, essentially. Even though Return of the King wasn't the best film in the series, that was kind of like the props to you, man. You made a great trilogy, and we're going to award you for it. But Lord of the Rings does have an iconic score. The acting is pretty brilliant. Frodo and Sam can get on my nerves a little bit, but all things considered, they're unbelievable. Andy Serkis as Gollum is amazing. The effects still hold up pretty well today. Being that the movie's like 15 to like 13 to 16 years old, depending on which one we're talking about. I know they were all filmed around the same time, so the effects are like 15 years old. Given that, they hold up really well. Some of the stuff holds up better than others, but honestly, the Lord of the Rings movies, to me, look better than the Hobbit movies that just came out.
Yeah, I think they were a little more judicious on how and where they used the CGI, where I think with The Hobbit they kind of, went a little overboard. But obviously, 2 thumbs up for Lord of the Rings. I can't add too much more to that for sure.
All right, your number 4.
So my number 4 is The Shining. So back to Stephen King. I did not see a lot of scary movies as a kid. This one I happened to see. I was 13. I was camping in a cabin in the woods in the middle of winter the first time I saw this movie. I was terrified. I probably, if you asked me then, I would have said that I hated the movie. I had to sleep with the lights on for 2 to 3 months after seeing that movie. Deeply affected me. As an adult, though, I can kind of see what an amazing film it is. I love all the conspiracy theories around it. I like watching, all the little documentaries that have been done. And I did not read the book until I think I was in college, just kind of side reading, nothing for school. But read the book and did not get that same sense. The things that Stanley Kubrick changed, definitely a change for the better. And I like Stephen King, but I just did not find in the book, if you don't know, there's no maze, but there are topiary animals, so like plant sculptures of animals.
Edward Scissorhands. Think Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah. There's topiary animals that like move when you're not looking at them, and like kind of they try to get Danny, and he ends up kind of scratched up a few times. I just didn't find that scary.
So I've never read The Shining, but basically you're explaining a combination of Edward Scissorhands, bush sculptures, and weeping angels from Doctor Who.
Yeah, pretty much. But I would say the weeping angels from Doctor Who are scarier than that too.
Well, they're scarier than just about everything, so that's fine.
That's true. But yeah, so the book I would say was not as good as the movie in this case. Yeah, I mean, obviously The Shining is just, it really is a work of art.
Well, you've also got Jack Nicholson's like all-time performance as Jack Torrance, and you've got, Scatman Crothers.
So true.
All right, dropping down, number 3, Jaws. Jaws is my number 3. I love the movie Jaws. This is one of my all-time favorite movies, based on a book by Peter Benchley. Peter Benchley writes a lot of kind of, I don't want to say schlock. They're not like bad books, but they're basically like popcorn reading. And he's written a number of books that are basically about sea monsters. So sharks, giant squids, etc., etc. Basically, he writes these popcorn movie books. And he's had some other ones adapted. I know one of them, he had one adapted about a giant squid that was like a made-for-TV movie that was, mediocre at best, whatever. And really, I don't think that any of his books are works of art. So I really think that Steven Spielberg took what was a, decent book and turned it into an outstanding movie, one of the all-time greats. And again, and this goes back to what we said about Dunkirk, he pretty much helped revolutionize the idea of not showing that thing that you're scared of. I mean, this is something that like John Carpenter did in Halloween as well, kind of keeping the killer in the background for extended periods of time so you don't really know what's stalking you. And even though it's a shark, it's so much scarier when you can't just see it coming, especially factoring in financial and special effects limitations that they had back in 1975, and the fact that they had a broken fucking mechanical shark. They pretty much worked with what they had, got some fantastic performances out of Roy Scheider and Richard Dreyfuss and Robert Shaw, especially as Quint, who, if you've ever watched any of the behind-the-scenes stuff on Jaws, Robert Shaw was a famous drunk and was fucked up beyond belief for the majority of that movie, including the great USS Indianapolis scene where he gives the speech about the USS Indianapolis. Apparently, he was so drunk the first day that they filmed that they had him come back the next day and reshoot large segments of that speech. And to this day, like, you cannot tell which parts of that speech are him wasted beyond belief and which parts are him completely stone sober. That's how good he is in that role.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks, Dana.
I know that was not helpful commentary, but no, yeah, I'm on board with everything you said. Obviously, I like Jaws. It's not my super all time favorite as it is for you, and I didn't read the book, so I can't.
Listen, I'm literally wearing a shirt right now that says, "Here's to swimming with bow-legged women." That is what is on my t-shirt. I love Jaws. Holy shit, it's amazing.
Well, moving on to my number 3. Previously mentioned, I had the Lord of the Rings trilogy in my number 3 spot. Obviously, classic, amazing movies. Not too much more needs to be said. I will say, in terms of the books, I had grown up watching the animated Hobbit movie. So I was like a little bit familiar with the characters.
The ones with the songs?
Oh, yeah. So I was excited for the movies when they came out. Obviously, the movies were incredible. After that, I thought, oh, I should read these books. These are great. And I could not do it. They are hard to get through.
Oh, the Lord of the Rings books they're a slog, man. Like, The Hobbit, I think, is a pretty easy read by comparison. But holy shit, yeah. The actual Lord of the Rings books, they're readable, but they're a little dense, for sure.
Yeah, so I'm fine to leave those as just films for me. But yeah, definitely number 3 spot. So, but we went over those.
All right, why don't you go ahead and go to your number 2 since I stole your number 3.
Okay. My number 2 would be the Harry Potter series. So, another series of films. I also have not read all of the Harry Potter books. I started them because I wanted to stay true to the fandom. Obviously loved the movies. They are very similar. They do hold up pretty well. I just, kind of lost interest in reading the story because I already knew it from the movies. So that's still maybe on my list to get through those books one day, and it probably won't be much of a challenge, but obviously those films, they, grow with the actors, with the characters. It's an amazing work.
There's really nothing out there like the Harry Potter series. You're talking about an 8-movie series that keeps all of the primary actors in their roles, with the exception of Richard Harris as Dumbledore because he passed away, and that was really sad. But they replaced him with Michael Gambon, who did an excellent job as Dumbledore and really kind of made the role his own. Every movie in that series is excellent. And, I would, for my money, I guess Deathly Hallows Part 1 is probably the worst because it's the only one that truly doesn't end. Which you can say about the Lord of the Rings movies too. So it's not a really big knock. I think they're all great movies. I think the acting is excellent. I think they lucked out as all fucking get out to get Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson, and Rupert Grint as their 3 main characters, because it is such a crapshoot when you're casting child actors, and they really knocked it out of the park with pretty much every single one of them.
Yeah, I definitely kind of view those two, and I do this a lot with series. It's hard for me to pick individual films, so I kind of just look at it as one continuation of a story. With the Harry Potter ones, it's a little bit easier to say, okay, the second one is a little hard to sit through, or kind of pick and choose that way. The 5th one, Harry is a whiny little bitch, but still amazing movies.
The second one has Dobby.
Yeah.
Fucking ripping on Dobby.
Dobby is not my favorite character. I was sad, spoilers, but
listen,
not my favorite.
Let's get this out of the way right now. For this and all future episodes of the Cinema MD podcast, anything that has been out for at least a year, no spoiler alert necessary. There's going to be fucking spoilers. If it's a new release, we're going to do our best to kind of tiptoe around any sort of spoilers, as we did with Dunkirk and Dark Tower. If we're talking about an older movie, expect spoilers. Deal with it. It's fine. If we start talking about a movie you haven't seen yet and you really don't want to know what happens, pause the podcast and go watch the movie. All right. Now that I'm done ranting, my number 2 is The Shawshank Redemption. And this is another Stephen King adaptation. This is, for my money, the best Stephen King adaptation. And this is adapted from a short story. And I don't know, man. This is like one of those great movies of our generation. I feel like this movie didn't get a lot of love when it came out, and it kind of found its audience on TV and like DVD sales and things like that. It kind of became like a beloved classic, but it took a few years to get there. I'm not entirely sure why that's the case, but I mean, these are like all-time performances by Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. This is like the movie of both of their careers, in my opinion. And it's kind of the movie that made like Frank Darabont a household name as well, as far as directors go. I don't know what else to really say about this movie. This is just one of those movies where if it's on, I don't care. I don't care that it's a 3-hour movie. Or with commercials on TBS, it's a fucking 4-hour movie. If this is on at any point in the movie, I am pretty much immediately sucked into the world. Like it's a very like brilliantly fleshed out kind of world of this prison society that Andy Dufresne is in, and the narration from Morgan Freeman is just outstanding as well. I don't know. I love everything about this movie. So I think it's a great adaptation. The fact that he was able to pull all of this out of a short story is mind-boggling.
Yeah, I mean, I would be hard-pressed to find someone who had negative things to say about The Shawshank Redemption, and if you're out there, I don't want to hear your negativity. No, it's a great movie. It's just a great movie. I mean, there's more to be said for sure, but you can finish your list.
I can finish my list. Uh-oh. What was your number one?
Well, you do your number one, then I'll do my number one.
Okay. So my number one is Blade Runner, based on Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Blade Runner, for, I would say it's the best science fiction film. Probably of all time. I mean, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so I would put it up there with Star Wars, but that's putting them into a pretty large bucket because they're very different movies. Blade Runner is definitely more of a sci-fi noir. It's a dark science fiction movie. It's not an adventure. It's not a space epic like Star Wars. Blade Runner is one of the most visually inventive movies that I've ever seen, and it still holds up to this day. When you pop that in, watching that and then seeing something like the new Ghost in the Shell remake that came out this year, it's amazing how similar they look. Aesthetically, science fiction movies are still borrowing heavily from a lot of the visuals from Blade Runner and a lot of the ideas from Blade Runner as well. I don't know. I mean, the performances are good, but all in all, it's just the entire kind of the score from Tangerine Dream, the visuals, the direction. Harrison Ford's great. Rutger Hauer's great. It's just an awesome movie, and I think the book, everything by Philip K. Dick, is really interesting as well. But again, I feel like this is one of those where the source material was elevated. And there's a bunch of different cuts of this movie. They're all a little bit different. It's kind of personal preference which one you like the best. I guess I prefer the final cut, but whatever. It's kind of up for interpretation. All right, so Blade Runner was my top. Do you have anything to add to Blade Runner?
Well, surprise. I haven't seen Blade Runner all the way through. I didn't see this one when I was younger.
This is a fucking travesty.
I know. We tried to watch it, but it was not an ideal setting. We were at a friend's house. I fell asleep.
You fell asleep. The story of my life.
Sorry, buddy. So yes, Blade Runner is on the list for me to see. So we'll probably maybe go a little bit more into depth when I see it.
Well, you guys can expect a Blade Runner review, a more in-depth Blade Runner review with Dana commentary sometime before Blade Runner 2049 releases. So that'll be coming up soon. Okay, so we have one more movie. Your number one.
So my number one, also, surprise, was The Shawshank Redemption. So I suppose I could have tied that into yours, but that was my number one. Like I said before, I have a hard time picking favorites. Maybe it's my innate sense of fairness, but I usually don't like to single things out. Hard pressed, though, if you wanted me to tell my absolute favorite movie, I think I would probably choose this as one of, if not the favorite movie of all time for me personally. Definitely have a lot of memories of watching this with my dad growing up. This was one of those ones where, you have the uncomfortable sitting with your parent. I mean, and it's pretty bad. It's not just a sex scene, it's a rape scene, so that was not cool, but, yeah, this was definitely one of our movies.
Hey, he fights them off with brooms sometimes.
It's true.
He doesn't get raped every time, just several times.
And yeah, I think this goes to both, I would say, Stephen King's and this director's ability to make something immersive. Sometimes I forget this is not a true story when I, watch this movie. It's just amazing. And yes, every time it's on TV, commercials be damned, I will be watching it.
I'm just going to throw this out there too. Honorable mention for me goes to two more Frank Darabont movies, as obviously we both love The Shawshank Redemption. He also did The Green Mile, which I think is universally considered a pretty great movie, and also a great adaptation of a series of Stephen King novellas. The other one that maybe is a little bit, I don't want to say it's like lesser known, but maybe not as highly thought of, that I really, really love, is The Mist. Now, I personally think the best way to watch The Mist, if you have a Blu-ray, the Blu-ray version of The Mist, at least the edition that I have, comes with it in black and white. And I think the one downside to that movie is that some of the effects don't hold up that well. If you watch it in black and white, I feel like it kind of hides the effects a little bit better. And I feel like the movie just seems a little bit grittier and more realistic. And I really loved The Mist. I thought there were some great performances in that movie.
That's another one I haven't seen.
I'm not going to rip you for that, because I feel like there's a lot of people that haven't seen that movie. Even my friends that are like my other big movie watcher friends, when I say The Mist, they get confused and they think The Fog. And when I say The Fog, they think the shitty remake with Maggie Grace and the dude from Smallville. They don't think of the John Carpenter version because they're assholes.
Right, as most people are. But yeah, I loved The Mist, the book, so it is surprising that I kind of missed that movie. I think that was one that I wanted to see and just kind of didn't get around to it, so one day. All
right, and that pretty much wraps it up for episode number 1 of the Cinema MD podcast. Next week, we are going to be back. We'll be talking about Brigsby Bear, Logan Lucky. We'll have another movie that Dana has somehow managed to miss out on for 30-plus years of her life. And we are going to be talking about our top 5 weird, bizarre / trippy movies. So please give us a follow on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all those fun things. We'll be up on YouTube as well. Subscribe on iTunes. And tell your friends. Cinema MD Podcast. We'll talk to you next week.
See ya.